Okay, so introducing our speakers, we are very lucky to have Tia, who was an elementary school teacher and a Spring member who comes to us originally from Ireland. And we have Peter, who is a public school teacher in Ontario and a Spring member. Just before I hand it over, I'm going to explain one last time how the sessions work. So the speakers are going to go first for a total of 30 minutes. Then we will have questions and comments from all of you. The intention is really for that to be a conversation as much as possible. So we're going to have all of that go at once. And then the speakers are going to have some concluding remarks where they respond to things that have come up. We encourage you to use social media throughout the conference. So if you do, please use the hashtag RedOctober2025. And you can tag Spring using our handle at SpringMag.ca. Okay, over to the speakers.
Okay. We stood on the edge of something historic in November 2022 when 52,000 education workers, many of them the lowest paid in our schools, defied Doug Ford's attempt to criminalise their strike. They didn't flinch. They walked out, and when Ford tried to crush them with Bill 28, the people of Ontario rose up. We saw parents, students, and workers from every sector rally in solidarity. It was amazing. We saw the power of collective action. We saw something else, though, too, the fear in the eyes of the powerful when we stand together and we're organised. But let's be honest, we were also so close to a general strike, and we didn't get there. And today we're going to talk about why. The Labour leadership blinked. The infrastructure for escalation wasn't in place. It's worth questioning, though. Were rank and file strong enough to push through the hesitation and union bureaucracy at the top? And what exactly was that hesitation that held us back? And I'm going to hand you over to Peter.
Yes, thanks. So I know we got education workers in here. It would be great to hear, like, in the discussion, where were you in November 2020 or 2022? And, what kind of things were going on at your sites and stuff like that? Because what I'm going to try and look at here is sort of, because I'm going to do a little bit of the timeline and stuff like that about what happened, and with a kind of little bit of an emphasis on those of us in Spring. How did we approach this? What was our attempts? What we try to do, and then look at a bit of the politics. And then you're probably going to look at sort of what should socialist-minded type people be doing in the labor movement and other movements at this moment anyway. You know what I mean? In general. So what happened back then? So we had, setting the stage, there was, as you said, 55,000 education workers represented by QP's OSBCU and led by President Laura Walton. This included their members that were people are custodians, you had EAs and services, you had office staff and stuff like that. But generally, lots of workers that help, that without them, schools can't run, right? So over the previous 2 years, before that October, November 2022 area, you've got these groups that were, as we've heard from lots of different locals and stuff like that, people that were taking on these courses, like these Jane McAlevey organizing for power courses, picking up some of that language and ideas and kind of getting inspiration from those, and taking that into their workplaces and their bargaining units and stuff like that. And so those OSBCU workers took sort of a systematic approach to engaging, organizing, and mobilizing their members. What this resulted in was a record-breaking strike mandate in October 2022, where 96.5% voted in favor of a strike with an 3% turnout, which, as we know, like looking across sectors, that's really huge, right? And that gave us a little inkling of like what was going on at that time, right? And what was possible. So recognize that these guys were going a government that before November 2022 seemed bent on disciplining education workers. And because QP was up first, making them sort of an example, right? this is Doug Ford, not a particularly, he's got his cozy payments to the LiUNA workers and things like that, right? He's making, payments to Unite Here and getting things like that, but definitely not a public sector union guy, and not a very pro-labor guy in general, right? So recognizing that this would be that kind of fight, many of us in Spring and those that we work with in Justice for Workers recognize that there needed to be a campaign to kind of create solidarity ahead of time, right? Knowing that there was this, in a month, these guys could be out on strike. It really put the pressure on those of us with this kind of, thinking about what was possible to paint the province purple, which just became a sort of modest campaign to get very visible solidarity out there that could be easy for people to tap into. We thought it would be sort of just a modest thing, maybe hopefully a few people pick it up, launching it on different things like Ontario-wide Justice for Workers call and stuff like that. Zoom calls and stuff like that. But the pickup was huge, and all of a sudden there was requests from all across the province to get these posters and materials that people could use in their community to support these workers. So you had the Ontario Parents Action Network picking this up too, organizing supportive parents and pushing back on then Education Minister Stephen Lecce's attempt to pit students and families against education workers, which of course was their plan to begin with. And these initiatives, coupled with the union's success in bargaining for the public good, produced a wave of support for education workers that swept the province. By the time they went on strike on November 4th, the public was firmly in their corner. And I think it's important to know, especially at a conference like this, none of that stuff's automatic, right? There's nothing to say that you're automatically going to get solidarity for these workers, but emphasizing sort of the unfairness in that system, emphasizing the work that they do there, and then having a field, having a network of people across the province that could, reach out and try and build solidarity really helped, I think, before that. So now going into the timeline of what happened in that near general strike, the fuse that lit this tinderbox of Ontario's labor movement was Ford and Lecce's introduction of Bill 28, what they called the Keeping Students in Class Act. It would have imposed a concessionary contract on the lowest paid workers, right? Forced them to take this contract, stripped them of their right to strike, and invoked Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the notwithstanding clause, to prevent any challenge to the bill, and would criminalize all strike activity and override human rights, rights protected in the Labor Relations Act and the Human Rights Code. Special 5 a.m. sessions were scheduled to force the bill through in record time. The Tories that, Ontario legislature, they're barely showing up to work as is, but they got in time to go and push this thing through, mocking the opposition as they did it, slapping each other on the back, the Tories just feeling so proud, oh man, we're going to really force them to, take this contract, and this is the first of a series of dominoes for all those other education union workers. Oh, ECTA, you're up next. Oh, ETFO, enjoy. There was an immediate backlash though. And so they were dead wrong in their calculation about how this would play out. Within hours of Bill 28's introduction on October 31st, the OFL, Ontario Federation of Labour, launched its Hands Off Workers' Rights campaign, and there was an emergency rally scheduled. 4,000 people turned up, giving confidence to Labour's most progressive leaders to push for escalation, right? Seeing these numbers in the streets, we're marching to Queen's Park, spur of the moment rally, parents, all this sort of thing, community members gave confidence to, I think, a lot of Labour's leaders to be especially the most progressive ones, to be okay, we're working with something here. It gave that sort of movement and swell from the streets, gave confidence the Ontario NDP caucus, who joined the rally and gave speeches. The next day in the assembly, they were kicked out for defying the government and stuff like that. Again, another feeling whoa, there's something happening here, right? When you just get that kind of feeling that, this is not the usual thing. Throughout the week, thousands joined online and in-person events to support education workers. Almost 600 people participated in just a Justice for Workers phones app, right? Tens of thousands sent emails to Tory MPPs. I think there was over 75,000 emails sent on the QP's Don't Be a Bully campaign. And you had parents and students rallying outside the downtown Toronto hotel where negotiations were going on. But on Thursday, Ford's Bill 28 passed. And of course, hinting at sort of the splinters that were to come in the party, Ford was absent for the vote, right? Not really feeling confident to be in there and having his name attached to this this bill that was already showing signs of being so detested. So despite Ford and Lecce's attempt to intimidate and threaten education workers, their walkout on Friday was huge. You had 126 active picket lines, including over 10,000 people at Queen's Park, and tens of thousands in dozens of communities across the province. And you had parents, students, teachers, and other trade unionists going to those lines to show support. One of the key things, too, that happened, hinted at something much bigger, is OPSEU, the largest public sector union in Ontario, sent a letter to its 8,000 members in the education sector, encouraging them to walk off the job and join CUPE's pickets. Now, OPSEU's move, whether many people actually picked up that call or not, it forced the closure of a bunch of school boards that were not going to close because of the threat of potentially OPSEU workers joining them. So just that very thing closed a bunch of school boards and made the strike even more powerful than it already was. The groundswell of support was growing rapidly, both among the wider public and within Ontario's unions, where rank and file members, again, were calling on their leaders to join the strike. Like you had all sorts of different groups being like, this is an existential threat to us as a labor movement. It forced the OFL Executive Board, which is its main decision-making body, to hold an emergency meeting on Saturday morning, where it voted unanimously to call a mass protest at Queen's Park on Saturday, November 12th, and to launch an indefinite general strike on Monday, November 14th. Immediately after the vote, labor leaders rushed to these Solidarity Saturday actions. And you had hashtag General Strike Ontario trending upwards on Twitter and Reddit and all this type of stuff. And you had on Sunday, you had OFL affiliates, including, everything that happened in 10 days, it's 10 days that shook the province kind of vibes. But OFL affiliates, including the teachers union, began calling emergency meetings to discuss or vote on joining the strike. Hundreds of CUPE staff representatives joined a conference call to prepare locals in every sector of the union, not just the school boards, to discuss the possibility of walking out on Monday as well. And you had the leadership rushing to catch up with its membership, who were demanding some kind of action on this, right? And then, of course, in other unions, leaders, pushing for this too, right? But by noon, Unifor made public a letter that it sent to Ford's office, hinting at wildcats by members in the auto sector. And beyond Ontario's union, the wider public was preparing to join the lines on Monday, including non-union workers and Canadian Federation of Students workers and stuff like that. And support was building outside the province too. At its representatives' assembly, the BC Teachers Federation voted to donate $1 million to the education workers' strike. Monday morning, the QP lines were even bigger than Fridays, and spirits were high, and everyone was waiting for Labor's announcement at 10 a.m., which we all are like, we're gonna call a general strike, holy shit. So it felt like the tsunami was just building, and would it break? You know what I mean? Of course, there was a curveball. Around 7:30 a.m., Ford's office announced he would speak at 9 a.m., about an hour before Labor's press conference, right? And by the time he spoke, it was clear that he'd been disciplined, right, by the province, essentially. He spoke slowly and deliberately. His tone was conciliatory. Of course, he did take his cheap shots at QP and education workers, but he said Bill 28 would be repealed, ... but only if education workers called off their strike. Whoa, okay. Goosebumps. So major curveball, right? And many labor leaders, with this announcement, many labor leaders were no longer confident their members could sustain what was about to be set in motion. This bill turned out to be like a gift from Ford in one way to the labor movement, an existential threat that helped unite the leadership of Ontario's unions and, create this resolve to take dramatic action. But with the bill gone, what's the basis of unity? What's the sense of urgency? It's changed, right? Quickly, debates within QP came up about whether to keep the lines up or take them down in response to Ford's announcement. And I suspect these debates are still going on, thinking about how do we interpret what was done there. They eventually decided to take them down. And so while this was a difficult decision, I think looking back on it, this is probably a tactical mistake, right? Workers probably should not have given up their leverage with this government or any government or employer until that deal was in hand, right? Especially with the kind of atmosphere that was there. But this is going to hint at, I think, some of the stuff that Tia will get at and that we can get into in discussion is that those workers held all the leverage. And it was truly like a historic moment. But it gives rise to a few different lessons that I think that come out, right? I guess, I don't want to show you. With rank and file activity, I think matters more than anything else. In the absence of, I think in this case, like an organized rank and file that could have these kind of heavy discussions and make decisions and act independently of whatever the leadership said, the labor movement, and this is a problem in general, I think in the labor movement more widely, is that without that level of engaged and active and like militant rank and file, it becomes hard for both. Is there's like this reciprocal relationship between leaders feeling like they have to act on behalf of the members, and then also, and the labor and the leaders have, are in a strange position where there's kind of like the nature of that position can be conservatizing, right? And I think there was a lot of pressure for them to be like, okay, well, we got what we want. The bill's off the table. That's a huge win. Let's take the lines down, as opposed to letting the members decide that and being able to act independently of that leadership and then potentially having a different outcome. You know what I mean? And I think we can get into that more. The other thing, but then the other lessons that we can see, because focusing on the amazing things that happen, right? Because it is the case that those workers defied the government, ended this loss, this illegal, making strikes illegal, and set the place for like, QP airline workers this year to defy legislation too, right? Like we can connect a through line through that. That's very important. And that does, when we think about this was a historic changing the landscape type thing. That was helped, of course, by the solidarity built outside of the union too, that was very easy and visible for people, and visible and easy for people to get involved with, and could spread like wildfire and really build support. It also showed that we don't actually have to wait for elections to take on bad leaders. Like there was the chance, I mean, that's the other thing too, when we think about it, like there's a chance you could have toppled Doug Ford in this case, but you got close and you really kicked him around a bit and humbled him in a big way. And that show was here. And then the other thing too is like, sometimes, especially socialists, we're like, oh geez, general strike, that'd be nice. Oh, it's so hard to get there. This thing popped up when we were kind of not expecting it to. And so the path to a general strike is shorter than we think too. It can come up, like these things aren't a straight line. It's not like build. It's like the class struggle is like this. And so being organized for that makes some of these big things possible. And I'll leave it there and let you talk about more generally like lessons for socialists, I think, in general, right?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. That was amazing. So what do we do about all this? How should socialists and left-minded trade unions act in this context, especially 3 years on now, where the feelings of solidarity and confidence have somewhat disappeared? Well, that's where Tia comes in. Sorry, I'm reading your part again. Well, as socialists in the labour movement, our role is not just to support strikes. Obviously, we have to, but it's also to build these conditions for victories. And when I was thinking about this, I came up with a few things. The first one being the connective tissue of the movement. We link struggles across all sectors, and I think we talk about this in our meetings at Spring all the time, between education, healthcare, transit, housing, and show how we're all part of the same fight against privatisation. How might we as socialists here today put this into action? Well, it might be something as simple as talking to friends, talking to family members, having conversations, meeting people where they're at. I just came from the class consciousness meeting where we just talked about the consciousness. Even having a simple conversation with someone is a start. Meeting people where they're at is very important. Finding the connections between unions, community groups, and social movements, etc. The second one was fighting for democratic unions. We push for rank and file control, transparency. We challenge bureaucratic unions, because although the unions are in place, as Peter and I often speak about, as union reps sometimes, I've worked in a school where a union rep turned the whole staff against the union, and then I've worked in schools where the unions are great. So it just depends, and I don't always assume that a union it has the best politics that they can have, because that isn't always true. And I think how we do this is just talking about day-to-day matters, right? Again, meeting people where they're at. It might not even be a political conversation, but it can lead to a political conversation. Building political clarity. We name the system. Ford just isn't a bad premier. He's a bad representative of a capitalist class that profits from our poverty, essentially. We help workers to see that their fight is political and that real change means confronting the system itself. Sometimes people feel powerless when it comes to discussion around Canadian politics, especially immigrants, and I know that all too well. As socialists, it's our duty to instill this confidence back into the people we work with, our friends, our family members, and remind them why we do have to organise for collective power. Another one was organising beyond the workplace, which is really important. Why it's important to be plugged into something like Spring, because it won't always be easy to have those conversations among staff, among your co-workers who are sometimes your friends and have very different ideas. And so when you come to organizations like Spring, you are kind of equipped in a way to have those hard discussions, to help build tenant unions, mutual aid networks, and community defense. We make socialism visible in everyday life and not just theory, but in practice. Joining Spring, showing up, just like what I said, encouraging others to do the same, just even come along. Preparing for rupture. We don't wait for the next crisis, we prepare for it. Build strike committees, solidarity networks, and rapid response teams. So I think Spring did a really good job at that. Everybody was kind of rushing around at this time. If you remember, it was a very busy time, and people were active, right, just ready to go. Because we're meeting all the time, and that's the best part of organizing, right, is that you're ready to go. So when the next confrontation comes up, we can help to shape the responses to these struggles. By rooting ourselves in workplaces with like-minded unionists, we can help push for strategies that help to take our struggle forward. For instance, arguing that we should not take down our strike lines in the face of Ford's compromise would be possible if we had more committed labour militants in those workplaces that having those conversations, right? That means being prepared and rooting ourselves where we are. It also means that we take the rank and file method seriously. We need an independent network of rank and file activists in every sector so that we can support leaders when they make the right choices, like we can be there ready to go, and we can act independently of them when it's necessary to take that struggle forward. So how can those of us in education organise ourselves to be an attraction for unionists who want to fight for a better public education and labour movement in Ontario? Some of the few key issues that stick out for me are the chronic underfunding in education and how that impacts us day to day. This is what is the driving crisis in education right now. Overcrowded classrooms, lack of support for the staff, deteriorating infrastructure must be linked with the underfunding of public services by the Ford government. Schools just simply are not safe, which means our children aren't safe. Bill 33 is an attack on democracy and in our communities and on a teacher's professional judgment. This can be a rallying point for other teachers to organise. And if you're in a staff room, you know those teachers are giving out. Opposing the policing and school to prison pipeline can help politicise others and situate education workers as fighting for the public good. By helping to name and expose these factors that make the job much harder and the education system worse, we can help to organise our co-workers in the right direction, pointing them towards the collective answers instead of burnout or individualism. When we act together, we can get the goods. We saw that with OSBCU workers in 2022. And if we can build networks of educators across all unions and all of our buildings, we can help strike back against Ford and inspire other sectors to do the same. With that spirit of 22, thanks.